living La Vida low carb. This show is changing lives. We talking about your diet, trying to get you feeling right. Cut up them avocados, fry some eggs, time to explore the longest running health podcast, hosted by Jimmy Moore. Time to give up the crappy garbage, we're getting into ketosis. Every day is a new step to your goal, yeah, you're getting closer. Motivated and focused, don't stop, just go. Time to get inspiration from the Living La Vida Low Carb Show. Hey, the livinglowcarbshow.com.
So guys, that right there is Dr. Richard Johnson. He is the author of a brand new book we're going to talk about here today called Nature Wants Us to Be Fat. So if you're interested in the topic of obesity and obesity research, Richard is like one of the top gurus in this. He's a professor of medicine at the University of Colorado. He's the author of a couple other books that I've actually interviewed you about, both of these books, both The Sugar Fix and The Fat Fix, or Fat Switch, excuse me. The Sugar Fix and The Fat Switch. Try saying that real fast, right? And I remember when you were on with The Sugar Fix, you were like telling me your hypothesis about fructose being the cause of obesity. And I was like, okay, but something is happening with refined carbohydrates that's causing them to be an obesogenic factor as well. And you actually, to your credit, I'm going to give you full credit here. You went and researched it. You went and kind of looked, all right, what's this Jimmy Moore guy talking about? And you actually found a mechanism where those carbs can actually be turned into fructose, which then become obesogenic. So that was kind of cool. And thank you for that honor, by the way, because you've given me credit for that.
Jimmy, you really, I do give you credit for that because, you know, our work originally just focused on sugar, and fructose is a main component of sugar. And it looked in the beginning like fructose was the principal driver. And so that book was basically said, hey, look, you can cut out fructose, and if you cut out sugar, you're going to have a very big benefit. And
yes,
it did with a lot of people, but not with everyone. And I knew that, and that we weren't seeing, that we weren't seeing as much response as we thought we should. And I was always bothered by things like French fries.
Yes.
Which are starch.
No fructose.
And, they're coated in salt and grease. And, I knew that they weren't good. And, you said to me, Rick, I tried reducing sugar alone. It just wasn't enough. And I knew you were right. And so when you brought that up to me, I said, why is it that the research shows that it's fructose? And yet, for sure, this is what you're saying is correct. If you eat bread, which doesn't have that, a lot of breads don't have a lot of sugar in them.
Yes.
But we know that bread's fattening. So,
yes.
So did a big experiment, and it was really kind of a surprise. People have known, Jimmy, that the body can make fructose, but it was always thought to be something that was, seen in diabetics.
Right.
But really thought of it as occurring in any other condition except diabetes. But the way it's converted, the way you make fructose is from when the glucose in the blood goes up. So when the glucose levels are high, that activates this fructose pathway, and where you start making fructose.
Yeah.
And so we started thinking about it. We thought, actually, when you eat potatoes and bread and rice, they're called high glycemic carbs.
Right.
Called high glycemic carbs because when you eat them, the glucose goes up a little bit in your blood. And they also go up in the liver and other places. And we said, maybe that's enough to trigger the production of fructose. And that was a big discovery. What we did is we gave glucose to animals, and they became really fat, and they became diabetic, and they had fatty liver. And I was really depressed because I'd been writing about how fructose was the problem. But when we looked inside the animal, we found that there were high fructose levels in the liver and high fructose levels in a number of tissues. It wasn't just the liver.
Well, you weren't wrong. You weren't wrong, Rick. You were right. Fructose was the problem. It just wasn't the consumption of fructose. Just like now, cholesterol, they make it the problem, but it's not necessarily cholesterol consumed that's the problem. It's things that turn to cholesterol in the body, vis-a-vis high triglycerides and things like that. By the way, tilt your camera down just a little bit. I'm getting a little bit of your nose. There we go.
Oh,
now
yeah.
I see that handsome photo now. So you've been out there doing your research for many years. Again, go follow him, you guys, over on Instagram. Dr. Richard J. Johnson is the username over there. drrichardjohnson.com is his website if you want to look at his research. And there he is in his lab doing his work. But you've been out there doing research into obesity. Why are we still hung up on calories in obesity research? I still see this drumbeat over and over and over. And not to say that calories aren't part of the discussion, but it seems to be the monopoly of the discussion when it comes to obesity.
Yeah, well, let me tell you a little bit about that, because, our work was we were one of the first groups to show that it wasn't just calories that were important. And I'll tell you the story behind it because I think it's informative. So, when I started my research 20 years ago, the thought was that sugar, stimulated appetite and was so tasty that you wanted more. And so it was really, we're just eating more and exercising less. And,
right. The hyperpalatability theory, I guess, is what was out there. Yes.
And there's some truth to it in the sense that people were exercising less, and we watched TV a lot and all this stuff, and also the plates. There's smorgasbords and all these things where you can go back and get a second helping, and endless drinks or refills, and
right.
And so it was evident that it made sense to a lot of people, and I don't want to bash them, although they were wrong. But the way we proved it, and actually there's a little bit of truth to it too. So let's just talk about it. So when we found that sugar was causing obesity, the big breakthrough was to recognize that fructose actually triggers a change in your body where you become hungrier, you become thirstier too. You become hungry and thirsty, and develop insulin resistance.
Yes.
Start foraging for food, and you start storing fat, and it's all part of a survival pathway. And it turns out that fructose specifically, biologically, triggers a pathway to try to store fat as a way to kind of help animals survive. So like hibernating bears, before they hibernate, they'll gain huge amounts of weight, and it's triggered, it looks like, by eating all these thousands of berries, not a couple fruit, but thousands of berries.
Yeah.
And that fructose in the fruit adds up when you eat huge amounts, and it triggers this survival response. So when you eat the fructose, it actually is sort of cool, because the way it works is it's the only nutrient that drops energy in a cell. So normally when you eat calories, you make energy. And of course, you do make some energy from fructose, but it resets the total energy level to a lower level in the cell. And by doing that, it makes the animal feel like it's hungry and needs to keep eating. So even though it's got stored fat, it'll eat more to try to make more fat. And so
that's the funny thing about a lot of the work that I talk about with ketogenic diets is you have all this energy on your body, but when you're a sugar burner, you're not able to tap into that energy because the energy is in the form of fat. And so you have to tap into the fat switch, as you talked about in your second book, of tapping into that fat storage. So you've got all this energy, but no way to access it until you eat in such a way that you can access it. And that's what's so frustrating about obesity is we try to make it so monolithic. It's got to be just this way. And if you do it any other way outside of that, they call you a quack, an extremist. Dr. Atkins was eviscerated for his diet. And yet he was such a pioneer of understanding what science later proved to be true.
Yeah, you're totally right. So so sugar, even though you've got fat on you, it makes you feel like you can't access it. And so what it actually stimulates more fat production. And it's biologic. You can prove how it works. You can inhibit it. You know, there's ways to block it molecularly. And I mean, it's a biologic process. So when you eat sugar, it triggers, and fructose, or when you make fructose, like eating those high carbs, it makes you try to put on fat and stay hungry. Now, what we did, you know, the question was, well, how, and you know, if you give sugar to animals, they will eat more. So if I you know, create and generate fructose inside the animal too, they will eat more. So then that raises the question, well, when you eat more, is that what causes you to become fat? And it partially does. So here's the story we did. You'll like this. We decided to give all animals exactly the same number of calories. So one group got sugar and one was a control group that did not. And they were given the same number of calories each day. Okay. And we did this experiment many years ago. And interestingly, when you do that experiment, the way you do it is you'll have all these animals and they all get individual little foods to eat, you know. And the trouble is, if everybody has to eat the same, you have to give all the animals what the animal that eats the least amount eats, because otherwise, you know, he's going to eat if he's eating the least, then everybody else has to eat that amount. So I did this experiment with my brother-in-law, Carlos Roncal, who works with me in my lab, and he's a wonderful person. And he pointed out that one animal really wasn't eating a lot. So all the animals had to eat the same amount. Well, it turned out that of all things, that little guy had developed cancer and wasn't eating very well. So what happened was all the animals ate, you know, 20% less than they normally eat. So they were like on a diet, but
hypocaloric, yes.
Were on a hypocaloric diet. But one group had sugar, 40% of their diet was sugar. Even though they weren't eating a lot, they were eating a lot of sugar relative to everything else. Well, at the end of the 3 months, every animal that got sugar was diabetic. Everyone. They all had fatty liver. They all had triglycerides. Their body composition was horrible. But because they were eating very little, neither group gained a lot of weight. Now, it turned out that, the group that got the sugar was a little bit heavier. And that's because they had a slower metabolism. The sugar kind of slowed down their metabolism, you know. And so they gained less weight because they were burning. They gained. They lost less weight. In fact, they tended to gain a little weight because they had a low energy expenditure. They weren't burning as much. But it was true. So it turns out that the principal way sugar drives weight gain is by making you hungry and eat more.
Yes.
But independently of that, the sugar is causing all these changes in your body, like diabetes, metabolic syndrome, hypertension. That's all being driven independently of weight gain.
So is it related to
diabetic if you give them a lot of sugar? Okay, so sugar is working two ways. It makes you gain weight largely by making you eat more, but it's working otherwise to make you insulin resistant and all that, independent. Be on a diet and you'll still get that.
But this gets into hormones, Rick, where leptin obviously comes into play, ghrelin comes into play, insulin, blood sugar, all of these things. Inflammation has to come into play as well, because a lot of people, they see obesity, and those of you that came in late, we're talking to Dr. Richard Johnson, about his new book, Nature Wants Us to Be Fat. A lot of people see obesity and they think, oh, it's a moral thing. A lot of doctors guilt patients into thinking, oh, you're bad, you're eating too much, blah, blah, blah. And they never tell them, hey, that fat is there as a survival mechanism because of the inflammation, because of the hormones that are going crazy in your body. They never explain it in a positive light. And so people see being fat as a pejorative rather than, oh my gosh, look at what a miracle your body is doing to keep you alive.
You are 100% correct. And like, actually, so it does drive hormones. It creates leptin resistance, and leptin is a hormone that tells you that you're full. And when you give fructose, it blocks that so you stay hungry. And we proved that in our animals by giving them leptin and showing that they didn't respond to leptin. Normally, if you get leptin, you eat less. And likewise, it stimulates little hormones like cortisol and glucagon, all these things that can drive metabolic syndrome. So, so this was one of the first thing that we figured out was that fructose activates the switch. And then the second thing we figured out was that it wasn't just the fructose that you eat. And I thank you, Jimmy. Jimmy, I thank you. That was a fantastic thing that you said to me. And it really, really made a difference to our research. Once we figured out that high glycemic carbs were the problem, along with fructose, suddenly it made sense because why these keto diets really, really work so well. And why low carb diets work, because you're removing the two main players that are driving this switch, glucose and fructose. But we did discover, I do think I want to tell you this because I think your listeners will like this because it was a big discovery. It happened only in the last couple of years. But what we discovered was that there was another way to activate this switch. And that way was through mild dehydration, not severe dehydration. If you're dehydrated and you are, good move. Good move. If you're a little bit dehydrated, that's where you get into trouble. If you're severely dehydrated, you're too sick to eat, you don't feel good. But if you're just mildly dehydrated, it actually stimulates fat gain and food intake. And the easiest way to do that is with salt. Now, salt's a controversial player, and I've studied salt a long time. There is definitely a relationship of salt intake with blood pressure, but it's not with everybody. So a lot of people eat salt. Young people can eat salt. There's no problem with it.
Salt quality matters too, right, Rick? Like if you get a better, like I love Redmond sea salt. I love that company. I love their product. They're not a sponsor. I just love them. I got a big tub on my fridge right now that I put it on everything. And especially when I'm fasting, that's like my gold when I'm fasting.
Advice on that's going to be good. At least I'm pretty sure. So anyway, so salt, it turns out that not everybody's sensitive to salt in terms of blood pressure. And you have some changes in your kidney that makes you hold on to salt in order for that to be a problem. So older people with kidney disease and so forth are more sensitive to salt.
A lot of people ask me, Jimmy, how do you get such good deep sleep? Well, there's a lot of things that I do, but one of the newest things that I recently added is this upgraded magnesium from a company called Upgraded Formulas. Go to their website, upgradedformulas.com, and you can learn all about this nano technology that they use for this particular mineral of magnesium. Again, it's called Upgraded Magnesium, and it's got all the different forms of magnesium in it using the nanotechnology so it gets absorbed a lot better. Guys, I have seen my deep sleep improve by as much as 30 to 40% simply by adding in this product along with sunshine exposure, darkness in the room, cooler temperature, all of the things that I always have done. So again, upgradedformulas.com is the website. Go check them out.
But here's what we found out. When you eat salty food, it it increases the salt concentration in your blood, and it acts sort of like a mild dehydration. And what it does is it signals the enzymes that convert glucose to fructose. It activates the process that changes glucose to fructose. Now, if you're on a low carb diet and you're eating salt, you know you have to have the glucose to be converted to fructose. So if you're not eating any carbs at all, you're sort of safe, and you can eat a salty diet fairly fine. But if you're eating a very salty diet and you're eating carbs with it, like French fries,
yeah,
all activates the enzymes that convert glucose to fructose, and that with the high glucose, it's kind of it really drives it. So it turns out that a lot of people who are eating salty foods, they can increase their risk for obesity. And it's just been recognized in the last few years that salty foods can increase the risk for obesity. And we actually did studies, and we found that, like in the Japanese population, where they eat a lot of salt, that the people who eat the highest salt are at increased risk for diabetes and so forth. And then we went on and we gave salt to animals, and for several months nothing happened. And then suddenly they became super fat and they became super insulin resistant. And what we found was that they had triggered this enzyme so that they could make fructose from glucose very easily. And so even though they weren't on a high carb diet, but they were on carbs, they started becoming obese. And we think that this is a second mechanism.
wow.
Now, the fantastic thing about this, my friend, is that if you give water to block the thirst response, and that actually keeps the salt concentrations normal, you can block the effects of salt. And what's more, you can even, yes, drink water, man, because when you drink that water, you're keeping the salt concentrations in the normal range, and you don't activate this process. So if you drink water, in fact, we gave water to animals that were on sugar. And if you give them enough water, you can block this response, because the sugar actually also causes some dehydration. And it turns out there's a hormone called vasopressin that's turned on. And that hormone's high in people who are overweight. And if you suppress that hormone, you can treat obesity. So it turns out that old wives' tale, actually, we don't call it a wives' tale, but we call it an old tale that, you should drink 8 glasses of water a day, that we learned, when we were little. That's wise. That is really wise, because if you drink water and keep the salt concentrations down, you can really block obesity and help it. So now you can over drink water.
Right.
You can become intoxicated on water, and that's
right.
bad. So don't go out and drink 20 glasses of water, or you're going to get into trouble. You're going to end up in an emergency room.
Yeah, there's a popular program out there right now. There's a popular program, Richard, out there called 75 Hard. And one of the protocols in that program is drink a gallon of water a day. Now, I don't know what that equates to in terms of glasses, but a gallon of water seems like a lot for some people.
Well, you don't want to drink it all at once.
No.
But over the course of a day, if you could drink 8 glasses of water, that's good.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of one of my messages. By the way, I enjoy watching you jumping in these, into the ice. And
yeah.
So this is really, actually, it's an interesting thing, because cold, as you probably are doing this for, can stimulate energy or stimulate metabolism. And
that's what I'm trying. I'm trying for that.
I thought you were a polar bear the first time I saw you jump in there.
I do make it easy, don't I, Richard? Yeah. So, hey, I want to go back to French fries for a second. Yeah. Because not only do you get the carbohydrate, which you've already articulated, that kind of starchy carb has a process in the body that makes it into fructose, which makes it fattening. Then you add in the processed salt, which is going to be man-made salt, not a real salt that you would buy like the Redmond's or pink Himalayan sea salt. But then the third element, and I wonder if you have any information about this, is the seed oils that they cook it in. We know how inflammatory those are. And with the inflammation, it must be obesogenic. Have you looked at that impact on all this as well?
I've read about it and I can talk about it, but personally, I haven't studied that in the lab. But I do have friends who've studied it. But before I just talk about that for 1 minute, I just want to mention that when you inject, a lot of these groups, when they make this, put the processed food out, they'll inject the meat with salt water, and it makes the meat look bigger than it is. It's
chicken,
like
especially chicken. Yeah.
And they do it to shrimp.
Yes.
And when you buy these shrimp that have been injected with salt water, they look big and they look huge. You put them on the frying pan and they shrivel up little things because the water goes up, but the salt stays in. So you get all that crappy, you get the salt. You don't want the salt. And, so it's a trick. But they also, there's a lot of oils and vegetable oils and stuff that are put in. And there's more and more data that these polyunsaturated fats, there's two types, omega-3 and omega-6. And omega-3 are good guys, and they actually block the effects of fructose. I have a collaborator who gave omega-3, and he could block the effects of fructose on the brain. And by the way, when fructose works on the brain, animals like rats have trouble wandering through a maze correctly. They get lost. They take longer times. I mean, they're like in trouble.
Well, our president likes eating ice cream right now, and I wonder if there's I'm just kidding.
I have cream too, Jimmy. There's a low carb ice cream that I really like. And I don't have any.
Is it
pineapple.
Rebel?
There's this one called Breyer's low carb ice cream that's made with maltitol, and it's really, you don't like it?
No, the taste is good. Look, Rick, the taste is good, but maltitol gives me explosive pants. I don't need that anytime soon. There's actually a better one out there I'm going to recommend to you called Rebel, Rebel. And they sell it in little pints and many different flavors. It's a better keto ice cream if you like keto. Because
you're right, maltitol in many people, luckily not me, but in many people it is degraded in the gut and causes diarrhea and stuff. But anyway, sugar can affect mentation. Animals fed fructose will have trouble going through a maze, and you can block those effects with omega-3 fatty acids. The ones that are like in walnut oil, and so there's some kinds of fats that are good fats, but the omega-6 seem to be bad. And there's a lot of people writing about it, and they're more like they cause inflammation.
Yes.
I'm not a big fan of the omega-6 group.
Although they are essential when they're naturally occurring. I think the problem with the seed oils, the vegetable oils, is they're highly processed. I encourage people always to go to YouTube, look up the video, How Canola Oil is Made. It's the grossest process. There's deodorizers and cleansers, and you just kind of go, and they have to do all that to make it fit for human consumption, and that's healthy. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I tend to like olive oil. Are you an olive?
Yes. Olive oil, avocado oil,
saturated fat. But yeah, and saturated fats. I do like saturated fats, but it's true. I don't want to make it a huge percent of my diet. But obviously some people have argued that it's okay.
Well, I think it's bio-individual. I think it depends on the person. There's so many genetic tests out there now too, Richard, that some people do better with maybe a slightly higher saturated fat, not the preponderance of your calories, but a good percentage of them. And while there's others with like the ApoE genotype, some of those people need to go lower in the saturated fat and more on the monounsaturated fats to get the benefits to their health. So again, the whole one size fits all to fix all of our weight and health issues has never been right.
Exactly. You're totally right. But I do think that this general pathway of fructose metabolism is very relevant pretty much to everybody, and how you engage it. We should be aware of it, and the high glycemic carbs and sugar really are driving a lot of this. Now, interestingly, we found that there's ways that people can become more sensitive to sugar. There's ways that they can become more sensitive to high glycemic carbs. And so, for example, the enzyme that converts the glucose to fructose is, when you're born, it's really not in the liver at all. And it takes a long time to kind of get it highly turned on. And so a lot of people can eat carbs and stuff, and they probably don't have a high expression of this enzyme, and so they can eat carbs easier, and without getting fat. But over time, it catches up to you. I don't know. How long are we going? Are we going till?
Yeah, we got about half an hour more.
Oh, okay, good. So let me. I'll tell you this story that we did, because we found that if you feed animals sugar, that they turn on the enzymes that allow, and things that allow them to absorb the sugar. So when you give animals sugar, or especially fructose, the animal won't absorb all the fructose it gets, because it doesn't have the systems to absorb it perfectly. And so some of the fructose actually passes through, and even though you're eating it, you're not absorbing it. But over time, you turn on these systems to help you absorb more and more of the fructose. So the more sugar you eat, the more you can absorb it. So we did this study in children, and we had adolescents that had developed fatty liver that was even diagnosed by a biopsy. So these were sick kids. They were overweight, and they had fatty liver already at age 14. And over time that can go on and cause liver failure. So it's a pretty serious issue to have it.
Yeah.
Fatty liver at that age. 14 is pretty young. And then there were kids that were overweight or obese that did not have fatty liver yet, thankfully. And then we had children that were 14 and that did not have, and that were normal weight. Okay. So what we did was we gave the children all the same dose of fructose, and we measured how much fructose they absorbed. Okay. And what we found was that the kids that were skinny really could only absorb maybe 2/3 or 1/2 of the fructose they got. And so they got some of the sugar, but not so much. The kids that were overweight but did not have fatty liver, they absorbed a lot more fructose, maybe 75%. But the kids that had the fatty liver, they absorbed 100%. They basically absorbed it all. And what it told us is that sugar is not the same for everybody. Some people absorb a lot, some people absorb a little. And probably it's not just exposure. There may be some genetics too. But for sure, the more sugar that you give that you eat, the more sensitive you become to the sugar. So here's the problem. Let's say that you've been eating sugar for years, and you've got everything is turned on. And so now you say, oh my gosh, I'm going to cut out sugar. And you cut out sugar, but you still find that you're not losing weight. And even if you cut out high glycemic carbs, you might find that you still seem to be sensitive. And one problem is that if you're still eating even a small amount of carbs, you might be converting a fair amount of it to sugar, to fructose. Yeah. So if you actually go on a low carb diet and for like 10 days, just cut all carbs out initially for just like 10 days, this system that's turned on will come back down. And
wow.
polluting your system. And so when that happens, then when you reintroduce small amounts of carbs and start work, you're not going to have that same sensitivity. So there's some tricks you can do to help. And the low carb diets, I mean, a lot of them will have this initial 2 weeks of severe carb restriction, and
Right.
I don't think that the people who invented these diets really knew what they were doing in terms of turning off this transport system.
Yeah.
But they were doing the right thing.
Well, if you look at the original Dr. Atkins diet revolution from 1972, I was less than a year old when that came out. And it had 0 carbs basically for that initiation. It only changed later when they made the new diet revolution to make it 20 grams or less. And now, Richard, there might you might not know about this, but there's a big movement out there of people only eating animal foods called the carnivore diet. And so they're eating basically this kind of diet that over a 10-day period would reset that. And so maybe that's why people that eat that way see such dramatic changes, not so much because of the elimination of the animal foods, but the elimination of the carbohydrates, not having this process continue to making the sugar in the body.
Yeah, I think you're right. It absolutely could be playing a role in that. And I have met people who are on the carnivore diet, and it does seem to be a fairly effective diet at causing weight loss. But it's I think they still eat a little bit of fruit, don't they?
Well, I mean, it depends on which guru. It depends on which guru you listen to. There's some of them that do the meat and the fruit. And then, like, I eat carnivore and have been for about 4 years now. I tend with the higher fat type of meats to still keep it keto. And I've done fine. Now, I still don't lose weight even doing that. So my nature wanting me to be fat, there's something else going on for Jimmy Moore that makes it a little bit harder still for me. But I keep doing all the little things, the ice baths, the saunas, all the things to try to move that needle.
Yes,
and
those are great. By the way, that speaking of the ice baths, there's a genetic thing that is a kind of interesting story. There's a scientist named Doug Wallace who was very, very interested in the genetics of migrations and so forth. And what he showed was that the people who came across that the first people to populate the Americas, they were Native Americans that originated in Siberia, and they came across the Bering Strait and then down into the Americas, and they developed mutations in their energy factories or mitochondria that allowed them to generate more heat, which is when you get into the ice, you're actually stimulating that you're doing this thing where you generate heat in your mitochondria, and to generate the heat, it reduces the it has this wonderful effect of stimulating your metabolic rate, so you burn.
yes.
And so it can cause weight loss. So whenever you get into the ice bath, you're actually stimulating these things that will cause weight loss. But it's interesting, these the Native Americans that it came across, they had to generate heat, and they did it by having mutations where they uncouple their mitochondria the same way that you're doing when you get in the ice bath. And that helped generate the heat that they needed to survive, their body core temperatures to help them survive. So there's a genetic basis that relates to this cold-induced thermogenesis that are what you're doing to try to help you. But I might be able to give you a suggestion that, as in the book, I talk about this, that people who've been overweight a long time, they get locked into a higher weight. And diets can do a lot of great things, and they do great things. And the carnivore diet and the low fructose diet, they all do great things to help the energy factories and intermittent fasting. There's all these different things that can help the energy factories. But what's happened is when you get overweight for a long time, the amount of energy being produced in your little mitochondria has been reduced. It's almost like it's set to a lower rate.
Yes.
key is to stimulate the mitochondria to make more energy. And when you do that, you know, Jimmy, you should be able to lose a lot more weight. The main thing that we recommend, and there's a doctor you may want to interview who's been very involved in this, is to stimulate those mitochondria. The one easy way is a particular type of exercise, not just any exercise, but this is an exercise where you have to like walk for like 45 minutes or bicycle for 45 minutes. It takes a period of time. You have to do, you know, this is one of the problems, and you have to do it like 3 times a week. But what you do is you do this kind of exercise where you walk or fast to the point where you have trouble talking, but you can still talk. And I think I saw you in one of your, I think
I've done HIIT training. Is that what you're talking about?
The way you do is like it's called phase 2. You want to get to a certain point where you're not generating lactic acid. So it's kind of exercising, as my friend Indigo says, you exercise to the point where you have a little trouble talking while you're walking.
Did you go keto and thought you had to give up wine? Well, let me introduce you to Dry Farm Wines. It is the world's first sugar-free alcohol that is lower than your typical wines, organic, made at local farms that do it the right way. Most of the wines that you buy are from 3 really big companies, loaded with additives and preservatives, so many dozens of those kinds of things. You don't want all that junk in your wine. So go to dryfarmwines.com/Jimmy and they will ship you these wines. And just because you listen to this podcast, Dry Farm Wines is going to give you a bottle in your first order for just 1 cent. Go to dryfarmwines.com/Jimmy and you will get your bottle of wine for just 1 singular penny. Go check them out. Dry Farm Wines, you guys. It's wine o'clock somewhere. Let's go get some wine. You know what's funny is the ice bath does that to me. It's almost as if it's simulating that kind of a response. Obviously, the exercise that you're describing would be really fascinating. I'll look into phase 2. I know, who was it? Dr. Mercola.
Yeah.
I know Mercola was talking about. What was the name of this doctor you said I should interview?
Inigo San Millan.
Oh, yeah, I know. Okay, I know who that is.
He's been involved a lot, you know, with professional athletes, and
yeah,
he's really an amazing character. He's actually also based here. He and I are collaborating. So I'm kind of looking at mechanisms that lead to this being locked in, and he's looking at some of the mechanisms to unlock you. And so, and actually, working together has been really good. And I do discuss, some of his work and give recommendations in the book for how to do this. And there are other tricks. I mean, like I have a friend who has works with dark chocolate, and it was known that dark chocolate, without the sugar added, but dark chocolate contains substances that can stimulate energy factories to increase in number. And so you can and that's really what one of the problems is when you're, when you get locked into a higher weight. And so he gives the compound, the substance is called epicatechin. And this substance actually stimulates mitochondrial growth. And there's a group of Indians of native peoples that live off the coast of Panama called the Kuna Indians. And it was, way back in the 1940s, there were people visiting these and the 50s and 60s. And it was very interesting because the ones that live on their islands and eat the native way, none of them get diabetes, none of them get obesity. And they're eating a lot of salt and a lot of sugar, actually. And so it's kind of like, how do they do that? And so a friend of mine went down there to try to figure it out, a guy named Norm Hollenberg. And he thought it was going to be a genetic problem. But what he found was that when these people moved to Panama City, that they actually they were like at high risk of developing obesity and diabetes. So it wasn't genetic, it was something that was going on the island. And the dietitian in their group was really sharp and figured out that they were drinking a lot of cocoa, a bitter cocoa. They were drinking like 10 cups a day. And later it was found that this bitter cocoa had this substance, and that substance was keeping the energy factories at a very high level. So, we need to do things to increase our energy factories. Exercise is probably the main way to recommend, but there are these other tricks that people do that may help. And a little bit of dark chocolate every day is probably a good thing. Probably like 70% or 80% pure. So now,
or even 100 and make your own sweetener in there and make it sweet if you need it sweet. Some people, they love that 100. I'm a hyper taster, Richard, and so when I have 100%, I'm just like, oh, it's just so intense. I can't stand it.
I have trouble eating that 100%. It's just a little too bitter for me.
Yes.
I know it's supposed to be good, but it's hard. So I usually do the 70% because I actually still like it. There's just a touch of sweetness to it.
Yes. So over the past couple of years, a lot of stress has been in the world for all the obvious reasons. And so people actually gained weight in the midst of that. And this is something, I know it's not, your research doesn't look specifically at stress-induced weight gain, but it has to play a role in the conversation when you start talking about nature wanting you to be fat. It's not so much just the foods you eat, but also the environmental factors. And so with stress and unmanaged stress, I would say, because a lot of people manage stress well and they didn't gain weight, but then a lot of people didn't handle the last couple of years very well and they put on a good amount of weight. So what factor does this play with nature wanting you to be fat?
Well, there's several aspects to it. First, let me just tell you that, COVID really has been crazy, and there are a lot of people who end up staying at home a lot.
Yes.
There is this thing where, I am seeing, because I'm still a physician and I do see patients, and I'm seeing a lot of people coming in with alcohol problems and with drug abuse, and also a lot of people coming in with fatty liver, and I think that being at home and not being able to go out, there is a thing I talk about it. It's called the enclosure effect. So the fructose is like a biologic reason to gain weight. You become hungry, and so when you're eating fructose, it's going, or making it, you're hungry, and if you have incredible willpower, you can say, I'm not going to eat even though I'm really hungry, and so the mind plays a big role of that. Now the enclosure effect is when you're in an environment where you can't get out of the room, you may end up eating out of boredom. You may be eating out of stress, so these are other mechanisms to eat, and they can be partially linked to it, because stress will, believe it or not, stress also turns on this enzyme to convert glucose to fructose. So the body recognizes that stress, and they try to activate your systems, and some of that leads to an increased biologic mechanism. But there's also the brain, the psychological aspects of being COVID, and it's just terrible. You can't do the things you want to do. And then, so you walk to the refrigerator and you look in there to see what's there. And then you say, okay, well, I'm going to eat this. It looks good. And you end up eating something when you're not hungry. And so there is this component that I call it the enclosure effect. There was a time in the past when people wanted to get fat, and there are studies going way back to like in certain regions of Africa and other things where there was it was difficult. Starvation was a problem. If you got married, for example, it was really important to try to make sure that you and your wife both had a little bit of extra fat on board, especially for the wife, so that if she got pregnant, that she could carry it through. So there were all these tricks, and a lot of them involved giving foods that were rich in sugar. But the other thing that was often done was to try to live in an enclosed space, like live in a particular hut and stay in there and for a while. This was a trick because it leads to boredom, and you end up eating more. And so I think, and stress, and I mean, it's not a good thing. It's bad that they were doing that, but anyway, it was what was happening, and I do think this enclosure effect is real.
Yeah, and the seclusion.
There was a guy way back in the 1500s, and he wrote a book that said that when chimneys were introduced, people didn't have to go outside to make fires, and so that you could stay inside the whole time. And he said that was associated with the first obesity in the communities of England in the 1500s.
Wow. Who knew? Yeah, the seclusion factor is never good, because I think the interaction with people and obviously being out and about and enjoying life takes some of that stress off of you. It's interesting what you said about the stress-induced kind of fructose production. I had never heard that before, so that's really interesting. And one thing that I've shifted some of my work into over the past couple of years, Richard, is trauma, and how unresolved trauma also can create a lot of this internal stress, which can lead to obesity for some people. Have you seen anything on that?
Yeah, no, it's really true. And the other thing is that there's two ways it can go. One way is it can go from stress leading to food intake, and the other thing is that fructose metabolism can also affect the brain in ways that can lead to behavioral issues that may predispose to weight gain. So, for example, fructose it really is very linked with attention deficit disorder, and I've written several papers on it. There was this period of time where there was some controversy over whether or not sugar plays a role in ADHD. I do go in it in the book and go over the evidence, but more recent years, I would say that the evidence is pretty strong that sugar intake really does play a role in ADHD, and it's with weight gain and with insulin resistance and with difficulty, losing weight. And so it's a very complicated thing, Jimmy. I think you're right. Stress can be a driver, but stress can also be a response to sugar. And fructose, for example, has been associated with increased aggressive behavior. And they say, well, maybe people who are aggressive tend to eat a lot of sugar. Or is it that the sugar is causing aggression? And it could be both ways, but there's definitely an association. And if listen to this one, my friend. If you feed ants sugar, they get aggressive. And there was an experiment that showed that you give them no sugar, and they don't fight other ants very much. You give them a little sugar, they actually get aggressive and will attack other ants. And if you give them a huge amount of sugar, they get lazy and they sit around and they quit fighting. But they still fight if the ant comes up to them. But it's like they don't want to walk too far.
So the answer to all wars is let's drop a whole bunch of little Debbie snack cakes all over the place so they can eat those and they'll all be sluggish.
Brilliant. I love it.
Yes. Hey, before you get out of here, I want to proffer, because apparently this is what I do when Rick is on my show. I want to proffer another idea for you to explore. And you probably have had the idea, and we talked about it a little bit earlier. I want to see a fructose plus seed oil, vegetable oil wing of your experiment, fructose into the experiment, no fructose, but seed oil only kind of wing, and then a control group. Because I think the seed oils could exacerbate that fructose response, and I would love to see it quantified in a research paper.
Jimmy, I'll do it with you. I'll do it with
Hey, let's do it.
And so when we get off, being on air, let's you and I actually talk about it in more detail. We'll design a study, and we'll do it. I think it's a very, very important thing to do. And what we should do is we should do some fats that are mainly omega-6.
Yes.
We should do an omega-3 one, because I think different responses.
Yes.
I believe omega-3 is a really beautiful, like the fish oils and so forth, that they're really beneficial. So let's do, because the experiments have not really been done there's been one study that was done in looking at brain effects that I mentioned earlier that was quite good. But I think we should do this really well, do a very good study. Let's plan it.
Yeah, I would love that. And it's a cool kind of thought process, especially with all the attention now on seed oils. People are now becoming to realize this substance that is in every single processed food along with fructose. So it's like in all these junk foods is both some form of generally a sugar / carb / fructose, some form of a seed oil. It's in everything. And so how can it not play a role? I would love to see it quantified. So guys, again, Dr. Richard Johnson, go get his book, Nature Wants Us to Be Fat, the surprising science behind why we gain weight and how we can prevent it and reverse it. Well, thank you so much for being here today. Again, go to his website, guys, drrichardjohnson.com. There he is on Instagram. You're not real active on Instagram, but I'm glad you were active today to be here for this interview.
Get more involved. But anyway, it's really fun getting together with you again. You are a high energy guy. And you're always, whenever I come onto your site, I always see you doing something wild and crazy that all has good meaning, good reasons for what you're doing. And so I wish you the very best. Thank you for your brilliant insights. And it was a pleasure today.
Time to get inspiration from the Living La Vida Low Carb Show. Hey, the livinglowcarbshow.com.
Woo! Tired of playing the mask game? Me too. That's why I wanted to tell you about the Unmask. This is a breathable, completely breathable. It covers, you can't even see that it's breathable, but it's breathable. Whether you're going on a plane, having to go into a store and wearing this thing, playthemaskgame.com is how you can get this mask. They come in all kinds of colors and everything. In fact, right there, you can see right through it what it is, but when you're wearing it, it does not look like it's anything different, but it's breathable, baby. Playthemaskgame.com.
Have you experienced the dreaded keto flu? Did you know that most of these symptoms are actually due to your body dumping excess electrolytes? This is where Element comes in. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink mix with everything you need and nothing you don't. That means lots of salt with no sugar. Element is formulated to help anyone with their electrolyte needs and is perfectly suited to folks following a keto, low-carb, or paleo diet. Element contains a science-backed electrolyte ratio, 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium, with none of the junk, no sugar, no coloring, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. Everyone needs electrolytes, especially those on low-carb diets, or if you practice intermittent or extended fasting, if you're physically active, or sweat a lot. Add Element today and see how much better you feel and perform. Use the URL drinklmnt.com/Jimmy.